Hey yo, dead ass G, my bad pimp. That's just what happened when you a motherfucking real ass boss, real motherfucking player, G. The shorties just love you.
Hi, it's Allison. 2023 marks now the second year of my paying rigorous attention to the newest cinema has to offer, as well as the first year I consistently drove myself to the theater, and while I might not have seen quite as much as last year, I still ended up with a longer list, which really just means I've gotten better at identifying what I will and will not like. Hell, out of all 103 movies I saw this year, I think I only actively disliked one or two of them. Regardless, I'm not here to poke at the stuff I didn't love this year, because there's way too much of that on YouTube as is. Instead, I wanted to give you my highest recommendations in the world of film, because there have genuinely been a lot of really great and really overlooked movies this year. Now, just in case you still need to be told this, my list here is highly subjective, and is of course going to reflect my own personal tastes and biases. Don't take these numerical rankings too seriously either. As for what defines a 2023 release, it had to have been readily available to me and the general public either in theaters or on streaming by the end of the calendar year. This means that the zone of interest will not be on this year's list, though this has taken me long enough to make, I have actually seen it now. It's good. Finally, as always, if you want a complete list of the movies I watched this year, I'll leave a list on Letterboxd in the description. Oh, and because I'm feeling fruity, I want to give a quick shout out to my favorite first watches of the year that aren't from 2023. Dread, The Driver, Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, Oculus, Straw Dogs, Hashtag Horror, All That Jazz, The Other Side of the Wind, Demons, and Cure. And just so my list can be rounded up to 50, honorable mentions are in order for Reality, Fair Play, Shin Kamen Rider, Landscape with Invisible Hand, Do Not Expect Too Much from the End of the World, Tori and Lokita, and The Outwaters. And now, on to my favorite movies of 2023. Number 43 is John Wick Chapter 4. Chapter 4, it certainly won't be the place to start for people new to John Wick, but if you're familiar with the series, the innovations it makes are just genuinely smart and fun to watch, and it's the sort of thing where you watch it and you go, okay, there is still juice left in this franchise. And to an extent, yes, it's kind of a bloated movie, but it also uses that time for more meditative purposes and to kind of explore different genres and characters that I really don't think quite got their time to shine in previous movies do here. This is a great movie for supporting characters, which the John Wick movies have always been so good at. Here they're particularly good, and I love the additions of Donnie Yen and Shamir Anderson's characters to the cast, as well as they got Rina Sawayama in the cast, which is just awesome. At its best, I would say the best parts of John Wick Chapter 4 rank up there with the best moments in the series for me. I really had a good time with it. Number 42 is The Flash. Sometimes I'll let the tism win. Number 41 is Boston Johnny. This is a film by Motrin Media, which is this small media group which has a very tiny but devoted cult following of, a couple hundred people or so, one of which is my friend Audrey, who recommended this movie, and it's not the easiest to find. I had to sign up for a frickin' Vimeo on demand to buy it, but I'm glad I did ultimately, because it's a surprisingly sincere take on the sort of enigmatic bad person comedy that were popular with people like Adam Sandler and Jim Carrey in the 90s. This time, Matt Farley plays the titular Boston Johnny as he's trying to rise to the top of the spokesperson game in his local commercial scene. And it's one of those movies that's both very blatantly ridiculous and absurdist, but also has just genuinely good character writing and acting, and things you think aren't gonna come back and might not even be funny the first time do come back and are funnier each time they do. Both a movie that is trying to lampoon this sort of guy and also trying to understand him. And I think it's really remarkably well done for what it is. It's, again, not the easiest to find. I'll put the Vimeo on-demand link in the description. Yes, it's a very cute and funny movie that, I watched and I was like, man, I sure do love my friends. So thanks, Audrey. Number 40 is The Pope's Exorcist. This movie is completely bonkers, but I was also, thoroughly down for it. Essentially, Russell Crowe plays the titular Pope's Exorcist, even though the Pope isn't really the one possessed. He's just having, premonitions of a possession. Russell Crowe is, the Pope's favorite exorcist, essentially. And there's this implication at the end of the movie that they're going to form, the Priest Avengers, and I think that's hilarious. But it really is this almost cartoonish, spooky castle movie where Russell Crowe plays this priest who rides around on a moped and has, this Neo overcoat and freaking debates demonically possessed Italian boys, like small children, like in the native Italian. It's so just specific. Everybody like eats the shit up. It's just one of those movies that it's too specifically weird and wild for me not to just completely fall in love with it. Because yes, the set design is great and the effects are pretty good for what they are, and like there's genuine craft put into the filmmaking here. But at the same time, the core of what they're getting at here is so bonkers that the way everything plays out is some of the most fun I had with a movie all year. It's not the smartest movie. It's not a movie I would recommend to everyone even, but it is one of the best experiences I had watching a movie all year. I do wish there was a little less Catholic Church propaganda, but what are you gonna do? Number 39 is A Haunting in Venice, directed by Kenneth Branagh. I'm officially on board the Kenneth Branagh tour train. I wasn't for a little bit, but this movie has convinced me that yes, I would love like 20 more Hercule Poirot movies, because these movies are just wonderful. Kenneth Branagh has like such a weird, fun time here playing with his toys. He just has so much fun making this movie. There's so many just weird, creative little flourishes in the filmmaking. Obviously, he has Dutch angles and shit, but like at this point, if that's all you think of when you think of Kenneth Branagh as a filmmaker, I feel sorry for you, because he turns this kind of super goofy Agatha Christie mystery, and from what I know, it's a fairly liberal adaptation of the text, but he turns this Christie mystery into something that's genuinely operatic and gothic, but also just kind of camp. Am I allowed to say that? I know the camp police will come for me, but like it's camp, is it not? It is just an incredibly entertaining, off-kilter movie where Kenneth Branagh walks around with his ridiculous mustache, which I have grown to absolutely love, and acts like a quirky little guy and solves a mystery. And if that isn't like the definition of cinema, I don't know what is. It's not a movie you'll love if you're one of those people who refuse to go with murder mysteries and just want to solve them before the movie does, which is an entire separate conversation about viewers in general, but it's so much more fun if you go along for the ride than trying to figure it out prematurely. Number 38 is Dark Harvest. This is the newest film from David Slade, and it is a wonderfully autumnal little fantasy horror movie about this small town in the early 60s where once a year, a killer named Sawtooth Jack will rise from the cornfields, and if he isn't stopped, everyone's dead. So there's no easy way to say this. They send their kids out to kill Sawtooth Jack, and they like make a competition out of it. It's a movie kind of about the characters trying to kill this giant monster, and the monster, killing other people accordingly. Like, it's a very violent movie, and it has some really fun effects. But it's also about the sort of ways their parents and the systems around them have kind of trained the boys to be this way in the first place. Like, it's about what causes the hyperviolence and the sociopathy and the toxic masculinity. And it would be great if it were only like a dissection of these things, but the twists and turns all just like are really satisfying and make sense and are, fucked up. And so it's, not only a really evocative retro horror movie. Frickin' Larry Smith shot this movie and it looks amazing. It also just has this really snappy screenplay with this remarkable tension and pace to it. Some of the acting is a little hammy, and it is very much a book adaptation, but like never to any point where I felt like it was a constraint on the movie. And the fact that this got unceremoniously dumped on VOD platforms instead of having a freaking theatrical run is messed up. Because I really feel like they did some interesting things with this movie that you shouldn't really necessarily overlook. I had a lot of fun with it. Number 37 is Anyone But You, directed by Will Gluck. This is not a movie I can defend as more than it is, but I don't feel like I really need to, because this movie is just amazing at what it is, and that is being a basic ass rom-com. It is a heterosexual rom-com. It is a white heterosexual rom-com, but the way everything plays out makes me not mind that, because Glenn Powell is really likable, and Sydney Sweeney is also really likable, and they have great chemistry together, and they're actually good actors on top of being hot people to watch in a romantic relationship. And so everything just falls into place really nicely. And on top of that, the movie is just really, really well written and funny. There's just such a great supporting cast of characters, and I don't know, there's just a lot of moments in this movie that made me laugh and smile. And on top of everything, while it is a fairly basic rom-com conceit, I feel like the way everything is tackled makes it especially sincere and sweet, and I don't know. Honestly, I think it's okay to say you like a movie because it made you laugh and the people are hot. So there you go. Number 36 is another rom-com, completely by accident, Rye Lane. This movie is still heterosexual, but this time it is black and it is British, so already there are new dimensions to the text that you can start to unpack, but more so than a movie that can be read along racial lines, it's a movie that can mainly be enjoyed along aesthetic lines because of how modernist and colorful and kind of woozy the film is. Like, the presentation, it's a movie very in love with its surroundings, and it has a lovely time mapping out that setting for us, and watching the characters interact with that setting. I like to say that filmmakers are architects, and the director of this film, Rain Allen Miller, I think shows that in spades because of how well she's able to, tell this story, which is a very, very funny and clever and also kind of moving story that is a rom-com, don't get it twisted, but it's also a movie about, growing as a person and self-actualizing. It's super cute and a movie I can recommend to pretty much everyone, and also just a really creative movie that is just immaculately well shot and well blocked, and I don't know, it made me want to go downtown and, see things in a new perspective. Number 35 is Bad Things. This is not a very well-liked movie for some reason. It's a film directed by Stuart Thorndike. I'm not even going to act like it wasn't a movie I just watched because I love Hari Neff, and she is great in this movie, and she does wear a whole shirt at one point, and I did, combust seeing that, but it's not a film that I can recommend to any Neff heads lightly because of it's not a fun movie to watch. It's a film about very, very negative emotions, about relationships and trauma, having to do with your parents, and it doesn't really have any neat resolve. It's a fairly ambiguous movie, and not only that, but the fact that it is a Shudder exclusive and is not really a horror movie does hamper it quite a bit. Not to me per se, but I know a lot of people are going to watch this and be like, this is not scary because they are thinking it is trying to do something it is not. I've said before that this has more in common with like color era Bergman chamber dramas than like any haunted hotel horror movie. In spite of all the mild to moderately supernatural stuff that happens in the movie, it's always grounded in the context of the characters and their relationship to each other, whether that's the main character's relationship with the other girls in the film or with her mom. Those are like the building blocks of sort of what you see conspire on the screen. It's a very emotionally powerful film because of just how lonely and resigned it is, but it's never not engaging, it's never boring, and the emotional peaks it has are like very uncomfortable and brutal, but like in a lot of ways I resonated with it just because of what it's getting at as it pertains to trauma and queer trauma in specific. It's going to be a movie for a very specific niche of people, but I am one of those people, so yeah. Part of me is just putting it on this list because I know it's not going to be on anyone else's, but I don't care. It's a good movie. Sue me. Number 34 is Blackberry. This is a film directed by Matt Johnson, who does a great job writing this movie and how it all peaks and valleys, but also like the very quirky and likable personality he is able to, bring out of this very, what you would think would be corporate little, it feels weird to say biopic, but I guess it would be a biopic. It's genuinely impressive and surprising. Also surprising is how this, it starts out as this kind of quirky workplace comedy, and then it goes to a freaking tense financial thriller, and in the final moments, freaking yanks the rug out from under you. And without getting too much into it, I mean, it's the story of the people who made the BlackBerry phones back when those were a thing that existed, so obviously you know the outcome. This movie left me with a sort of emotional despondency that, like, I was not expecting. There are dramatic peaks in this movie I was not expecting at all. Like, I was not expecting the fucking BlackBerry movie to be more emotionally potent and affecting than a lot of movies I saw this year. And it was, because of just, how well written it is and how well acted it is in spite of itself. Like, freaking Glenn Howerton is one of the main people. God help me if I can remember his name. Jim. And, it's a performance you watch, and you're, on the one hand, you're like, that's camp. This is kind of a joke. But then you watch more of it, and you see that underlying pain, and that underlying resignation, and just a lot of the added depth that comes to Jim as a person through spending all this time with him, and how he relates to other people, and how he kind of fucks up a lot of shit, even though he might not have intended to do that at all. On the one hand, kind of vaguely a satire of the sort of dog-eat-dog world of capitalism, but more so it's a movie about wanting to make art, and, you know, there's absolutely an art to making the smartphone, just as there is any real craft. But it's a film about how that want to create art often negatively clashes with the need to make money, and as a result, if you are not pulling off the tightrope act of a century, you are going to go under in either the quality of your art or you're gonna go bankrupt. It's a kind of sobering movie in that regard, but it's also just really funny. Autistic Jay Baruchel is like an innovation that like is too powerful for my brain to behold. Like, that's just like, he just like me for real. But Glenn Howerton is also just hysterical. Matt Johnson is like a weirdly good character actor. Frickin' Prosy D is in this movie. And he's not bad in his role either. Like, the whole movie is just something I can like thoroughly recommend to people, but I will warn you, it's not the movie you might think it is. It is a movie that goes in, it's kind of like a chameleon. It goes in quite a few different directions, and it is able to quite successfully capture the essence of all of them throughout its runtime. Number 33 is Knock at the Cabin, directed by M. Night Shyamalan. And if there was ever a director who was more misunderstood in the public eye than M. Night Shyamalan, it would be Zack Snyder. But that's for the next entry. M. Night Shyamalan, though, is like a very complicated filmmaker for me. Not in that I think he is a bad filmmaker. I think he's a great filmmaker that has a very weird ableism undercurrent running throughout his movies that can kind of ruin his movies for me. As a neurodivergent person, even though I feel like he makes up for it in his other movies by being just so autism coded, for lack of a better, like, there's no easy way to put it. It's just like, you watch Signs, you watch Lady in the Water, you watch The Happening, and you're like, yeah, no, these movies have the tism. I do want to defend him because he is so much better than the public perceives him to be. And, you know, I have a lot of friends who will, like, uncritically adore his work, and I don't blame them. He's a really good filmmaker, and he has a lot of great movies. But there's always been that, like, asterisk to his filmography that, you know, he doesn't always get past. Even recently with, like, movies like Old. I feel like even a lot of people who aren't, like, Shyamalan truthers, like, came around to that movie and were like, hey, this is actually kind of a weird, fun thriller. And I was like, it's like a cut scene or two away from being a good movie for me. I'm sorry. But none of that really matters because Knock at the Cabin is not a movie that has those problems. It is not a movie I would have expected him to make, but I'm really glad he did. Not just because of how well shot and distinct he makes it, but also because, I don't know, it feels like a genuinely bold movie for him. It's a movie about queer assimilation, and that's a big term for, as far as I know, cis and heterosexual man to be tackling in a movie, but by gum, he does it, and he does it really well. Beautiful acting from everyone. Dave Bautista is becoming like one of my favorite guys in Hollywood. Great child acting too, but yeah, it's essentially about like 4 different people coming to this cabin and essentially telling this gay couple, hey, one of you has to die or else the world is going to end. It goes there in so many ways, so many more ways than I would have expected to. I love it. I really do. But it's not a movie I'm going to return to a lot because it's a fucking downer, dude. It is genuinely apocalyptic and sad, like letting go of loved ones. Man, it's not something that I think about a ton, but like this movie like hits you right in the gut. It is a sucker punch, effectively. That would have been a great segue into number 32, but no, I think it's a really well executed movie that is weirdly respectful and empathetic. Like, M. Night Shyamalan has always been really good at displaying that human connection in his movies, and here it's at an all-time high, and the film is just, it hurts, but like it's a good hurt. It's a burning that, you know, I don't feel like I felt watching a lot of other movies in recent memory even. I feel like this is going to go down as one of his better films, and honestly the fact that it only got kind of lukewarm reception is really disappointing to me because I think this is one of his better movies. Then again, Glass is my favorite M. Night Shyamalan movie, so take everything I say with a massive grain of salt. Maybe this is the year I make the M. Night Shyamalan video. I've been putting it off for so long. I don't want to have to deal with that though. Anyhow, as I've previously alluded to, number 32 is Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire. Another movie I genuinely am confused at the negative reception to. Like, at least as overwhelmingly negative as it's been. I get Zack Snyder not being your thing, because he isn't. He absolutely isn't. If you know me, Zack Snyder is like one of my absolute favorite filmmakers of all fucking time, and this is another banger from him. But, I can absolutely see why Zack Snyder isn't for everyone. He is very, very specifically up my alley, and he continues to make the most palatable versions of things I don't feel like I normally like. He just got done doing that with superhero movies, and now he's started doing it with the sort of Comic-Con sci-fi world. And I am 100% down for it, and I'm not sure why people really have a vendetta against this movie specifically. Like, I get that it's doing things other movies have done before, but I don't feel like that's a valid criticism you can make against a fucking movie in the 21st century. And also, like, have y'all seen the movies y'all given 5 stars to recently? You guys are hypocrites, essentially. On top of me always wanting to root for Zack Snyder because his movies are, without fail, consistently shat on and misinterpreted over and over and over by people who I feel like would normally know better and would normally be able to, give more nuanced takes. Beyond me just wanting to go to bat for him because he is, like, a talented filmmaker, I do really enjoy Rebel Moon. I like all the characters. I like how explicitly the film grounds itself in this working class perspective, and it feels like it has a much more explicitly radical tinge to it than something like Star Wars is the easy comparison, but George Lucas, he was kind of cooking with the prequels. Those are kind of Marxist, one might say. So I do feel like Zack Snyder is kind of taking a page from Lucas, but also he is just like a much better filmmaker. I don't know how else to put it. Like, George Lucas is a great writer, but as a director, a lot of his movies are kind of flat. I'm gonna be honest. Think about it. Like, I like George Lucas. It's just, yeah. Zack Snyder, on the other hand, just knows how to shoot action sequences. At least to my aesthetic predilections, he does them close to as well as anyone has ever done them. A lot of the more physical action scenes in this movie are awesome, and I'm really glad that he's made a film that has this more ever-present looming sense of danger and threat that isn't like sugar-coated, because believe it or not, that gives the film more of an impact. I don't know, it's a film that feels like a bunch of people going up against something genuinely insurmountable, and I'm really excited to see how it concludes. Because yes, it is just a part 1 of something, but it's one of the better part 1s I've seen in anything, as well as like one of the better ones I've seen all year. Because there were like a few of those for some reason. Alright, number 31 is Sick of Myself. This is one of 2 films I saw this year by Christopher Borgli, the other one being Dream Scenario, which was almost an honorable mention, but I wanted to keep it to 1 film per director. Anyhow, Sick of Myself is a Norwegian film, essentially about a lady who's just so starved for attention that she starts taking medication that was called back for giving people skin disease, essentially. So the film is her getting addicted to this and becoming sicker and sicker and sicker for the purpose of, I guess, fame and clout and attention. And it works because people feel bad for her because she looks horrifying. That sounds mean. It's not like an anti-disfigurement movie or anything. It's not like ableist or anything in its messaging. Honestly, more than I would have ever expected, is kind of a body horror movie. Like, it reminds me of The Fly. And the special effects, the makeup work are phenomenal. Like, best of the year, maybe the decade material. And it all goes towards painting a portrait of someone who is completely fascinating, but is also not quite all there mentally. And seeing her physical state deteriorate along with her mental state is fascinating. And it doesn't go as hard on like cringe comedy and secondhand embarrassment type shit. I expected it to, which on the one hand is a pleasant relief because I was expecting this movie to be like just full body pain. But on the other hand is like, I admire the filmmaker's restraint and the fact that they wanted to do something more explicitly unique with this story, because there really is nothing else like it I think I've ever seen. And I won't spoil it, but I think there are scenes in this movie, especially towards the end, they rank as some of my favorites of the year, and it doesn't overstay its welcome. It's just like a very, very airtight character study. And I really can't recommend it enough, especially if you are a fan of body horror. Number 30 is Showing Up, directed by Kelly Reichardt. Reichardt has been one of my favorite filmmakers for a little bit now, and Showing Up is just another super good, wholesome addition to her filmography. This is one of her many collaborations with Michelle Williams, who is phenomenal here in the main role. And here she's joined by fucking Andre 3000, who does, at one point, play his jazz flute, and it is probably the best moment in cinema you'll see all year. Beyond that, though, I think this film is like a super, on the one hand, existential movie, because it's a film about an artist who's pretty hard on herself and is also battling through imposter syndrome in the art scene, but it's also just a very, very aesthetically beautiful movie. So it creates quite the contrast between form and content. Like, it's very aural film, like it's very tactile. I think the sound design is incredible. And beyond that, it's a deeply personal film in a lot of regards that captures a lot of the artists I've known in my life better than I've seen like any movie capture them. It is a very quiet movie, like all Kelly Reichardt movies, and it doesn't really have easy answers, but beyond just being a really mellow character study of slightly prickly but always understandable characters, I think it is really getting at something about the starving artist archetype that I wouldn't have expected from Kelly, but I am really glad she ended up making, because I wouldn't say this is her best film, but it's continued to grow on me as the year has passed, and absolutely give this one a shot. Number 29 is Joyride, directed by Adele Lim. This is one of the biggest surprises of the year for me, because, I don't know, I'd seen trailers for it, I thought it looked fine. I am historically a pretty big fan of raunchy comedies. I am a Seth Rogen auteurist. It's a dirty job, but someone's gotta do it, okay? So I went to see this movie mostly because I want to support comedies coming out still, because that's just not something that happens a ton these days. And while I didn't have the highest of expectations, this movie is genuinely just fucking wonderful. It is a blast. One of, if not the funniest movie I saw all year. The cast of characters is just so eclectic and well realized and faintly familiar, but like it's a completely new take on that archetype all the same. The character writing is just so bizarrely good and well realized by the actors, and beyond being great character work, the way they all kind of bounce off each other is not sitcom-like. If nothing else, it's too vulgar to be sitcom-like, but it does have that sort of snap that a lot of my favorite comedic TV shows have. It's a super colorful movie. It's horny. It's kind of heartfelt. It has more depth to it than I would have thought, especially in its third act, where it gets deeper into the conceit of this concept of, Asian American friends traveling through Asia to find their birth parents. Beyond me just being a sucker for road trip gone wrong movies and raunchy comedies, I feel like this movie is one of the best examples of both of those we've had in ages, and Adele Lim directs the shit out of it. It's a genuinely interesting movie about finding your place amongst the sort of cultural hubbub that's been created over, centuries between countries. It's getting at something deeper that I'm probably not the person to talk about, because as far as I know, I am not Asian. But it is a really just wonderfully expressive movie that is, I can't really stress this enough, hysterically funny. It's quite simply a hoot. Deadeye is like one of the best characters in anything like ever. Number 28 is The Caine Mutiny Court-Martialed, directed by the late, great William Friedkin. I was first introduced to William Friedkin's movies in more depth this year. I obviously had seen The Exorcist before, but I was 14 and I didn't get it, so I didn't like it. But I did revisit it this year, and yes, it is a good movie. 14-year-old me was wrong, as it would happen. Also, y'all seen Sorcerer? That movie is, like, perfect. Anyhow, The Caine Mutiny Court-Martial is, I guess, the final movie of Friedkin, now that he unfortunately passed away this past year. And I think not only did he go out on a high note, he went out on a kind of like a really sick note when you think about it in a more metatextual lens. Like, using auteur theory, the final scene of The Caine Mutiny Court-Martial, which I would not dare spoil, is one of the most badass mic drop moments I think you could possibly have. And I'm sure it wasn't his planned last film, but I think this does the job immaculately well. It is a Showtime film, I believe, that has a very polished, almost direct-to-video sort of sheen to it, but you should know better than to distrust Billy Friedkin, because he pulls through some of the best direction of actors I've seen in a long time. The way he just kind of lingers on them and lets their frustrations boil to the surface. Like, you get so much from the actors just facial expressions in this film that it doesn't need to be said. There's so much in this movie that is told merely through implication. But also, when those emotions do bubble to the surface and, words come out, this movie that would maybe feel like a stage play ends up feeling more cinematic and more like a classic drama from the 80s or 90s that William Friedkin might have made back in the day. It's all vividly realized, really cleanly, sharply shot, like just smooth, has that, gorgeous, polished wood courtroom look, and it has maybe my favorite cinematic innovation in all of 2023 cinema, which is Jason Clarke playing a lawyer that'll make you shit your pants. Because holy shit. He is phenomenal here as a lawyer, as is Jake Lacey, who I had written off because he was in The Office and was whatever. But he is great here. In retrospect, it was probably just his character on The Office being not great. And freaking Kiefer Sutherland is hilarious in this movie. There is a cut from him to Lance Reddick at one point that made me absolutely lose my mind. And, he is funny to watch because he is just this buffoon of a man, but you can tell it's getting at something deeper in his character that he and we are both not super comfortable with. And that's really interesting stuff that I would not spoil. The other late cast member of the film is Lance Reddick, who essentially is like the head judge of this trial. And man, I just miss Lance Reddick because he eats this up. He is so good. He is so dryly funny, but also intimidating, but also like he's the sort of person who's charismatic when he wants to be, but he doesn't have to be to get you to respect him. And here, just the way he interacts with a lot of the characters, it's funny and it's telling and it's moving in so many different spots that, I don't know, it's just one of those really well-written, solid movies that, like, it's not nominated for anything at the Oscars as far as I know, but, if this came out in the 80s or 90s, I feel like it might have been, because it is just such a tightly written piece of drama that kind of reminded me that, yeah, courtroom dramas are the bread and butter of cinema for a reason. Like, this movie reminded me that, Anatomy of a Murder, yeah, is probably, like, the best movie any of us will ever make. Not to say it has too much in common case-wise, you know what I mean. Anyhow, R.I.P. Legends. I'm glad you guys went out on a note as high as this. Number 27 is the film The Royal Hotel, directed by Kitty Green. This is, I think, her second film following The Assistant, which I have not seen. I'll get around to it sometime. But this film is essentially about Julia Garner and Jessica Henwick, makes eyes, going to work for a couple weeks in Australia as bartenders, and end up having a negative culture clash with the townspeople that end up being their patrons. This film I initially really liked watching it in theaters because it is a super mega slow burn. It's the sort of movie that was in theaters for like a couple days. I'm really just glad I got the chance to see it in theaters because it is a film that it does reward your patience, but it is a film that revels in the details. It revels in a lot of the small stuff that then comes to a head eventually, but it's not the most emotionally gratifying head. Like, it's not... that's what she said. It's a film that feels like just taking a look in the mirror as much as it does sort of peeling back the layers of power dynamics in this rural hotel bar that attracts some surprisingly okay and some surprisingly bad people. And while it is a film I think you can watch perfectly fine without having this knowledge, I gotta say, if there's one piece of advice I have for people watching The Royal Hotel, is to also watch the film from 1971, Wake and Fright. Content warning for kangaroo death, like actual, like, they killed kangaroos for the film. So I understand if you don't want to watch it for that reason, because they show it and it's harrowing. It's not something I can defend in any capacity beyond pointing at other movies that do that sort of thing and people seem to love. So, Apocalypse Now, as well as Cannibal Holocaust, and now Wake and Fright of animal violence. That's awesome. I mean, fucking Walt Disney and Lemmings, okay. But essentially, The Royal Hotel is a film that came a little over 50 years after Wake and Fright, and is directly in conversation with it. While Wake and Fright is a film about, like, a male school teacher going on vacation and getting trapped in with the wrong crowd in this small Australian community, The Royal Hotel is tackling that as it pertains to feeling secure as a woman in very masculine circles, and how you sort of deal with sexism and chauvinism and a lot of the very gendered ills of not just modern society, but society historically. How do you start to unpack that historic prejudice as deep as it runs in so many people? And it's both more nuanced and more damning than I would have expected. But really, I feel like if you can handle them, because they are both very emotionally intense films, watch them in a double feature, because I think they have a lot of interesting things to say in relation to each other as far as gender goes, and are both, like, just great movies as well. Wake and Fright is, like, one of the more disturbing movies I think I've ever seen, though, so be warned. Number 26 is Infinity Pool, directed by Brandon Cronenberg. Well, I have slightly cooled on this movie since I, finally finished watching through David Cronenberg's films and watched Master of the Stars, which is one of his very best movies, and also, like, just kind of a better version of this in a lot of ways. I still think it's a phenomenal film because of just how good Brandon Cronenberg is at directing this. It is an aesthetically beautiful film, freaking kaleidoscopic, psychedelic. I think I called it Michael Mann for Degenerates at one point, and I feel like that's just the perfect way to describe it. It is his approach to line work and shooting architecture, sharp angles, put through this very distinctly perverse lens of the story here, which is essentially Alexander Skarsgård becoming an increasingly hollow shell of a human being as he joins this group of rich people who do, like, crime and weird orgies and shit at this one hotel. It's essentially a guy with no personality who follows rich hedonists with the hope of gaining a new personality, but really just ends up having his most vulnerable issues exposed and kind of turned into fetish shit. I really don't know how to get into this movie without just, reading the writing I've already written about the film, because I have written in some detail about what the film was trying to do as it pertains to how toxic behavior relates to the ruling class, and how the film tackles gender dynamics and kink and even, like, body dysmorphia and just the concept of identity itself. It's the type of film I can picture being something a lot of people would hate if it rubs them the wrong way. Personally, obviously it could never be me, because I think the film is great. I think it's super interesting and well acted and beautifully shot and edited, and it has so much to say about societal expectations, about quote-unquote gender roles, and it is, like I said, a literalization and dissection of capitalism breeds innovation. There's a lot here, and it's not going to be the most comfortable watch for almost anyone. That being said, it's a trip, and it's one that I think didn't quite get the love it deserved this year. So yeah, shout out to Infinity Pool. Number 25 is Meg 2, The Trench. So I started getting excited for this movie as kind of a meme, because the trailers, for one, looked insane, but also Ben Wheatley was directing it, and I watched all of Ben Wheatley's films in preparation for this film coming out, and let me be the first to say that the fact that Ben Wheatley directed Meg 2, The Trench is fucking insane. Like, most of his movies are low-budget British character drama thriller things. He makes kind of gritty and psychedelic movies. He makes movies that remind me more of stuff that would come out in the 70s experimental film scene than something like Meg 2. That being said, he's also a good director. Like, you've seen A Field in England, you've seen Kill List, you've seen Down Terrace, Happy New Year, Colin Burstead. Free Fire is probably, like, his worst movie, and of course it was the most popular movie he had made up until the Meg 2. But yeah, don't sleep on Ben Wheatley, because he has a lot of great movies in his catalog. I even like the Rebecca remake he did, even though Armie Hammer is in it. Anyhow, I semi-ironically started watching Ben Wheatley's movies to get myself prepared for Meg 2, ended up becoming a fan of his, and I genuinely do not know why this has so many Razzie nominations. Like, it seems like the easy thing to pick on, but, like, have they watched it? Like, why does Ben Wheatley have a Worst Director nomination? This movie is gorgeous. This movie is so well made for what it is. There's so many references to other films, intentional or not, through the form and through the content. There's a lot here, yet it still feels like its own thing. Not only is that a testament to how versatile Ben Wheatley is as a director, he can direct action, he can direct suspense, and horror, sci-fi, and psychedelia, and comedy. And the fact that he was able to capture all of that even in this movie that is definitely him at his most silly, but, like, undeniably passionate. Like, I don't know, it just works for me, especially because, again, it is a Ben Wheatley movie at heart. There's still that psychedelia, that hatred of rich people, the sort of British dark humor applied to absolutely wild scenarios. As I said before, his knack for examining the dichotomies between his cast of characters is probably like the strongest thing about all of his movies. So the fact that he got a sitcom cast here to work with, it leads to just some incredible writing that all intersects in the right ways, and beyond being good genre fare or good for a blockbuster or whatever, it's the sort of movie that I can genuinely picture everybody working on it having fun making, and is also the sort of film that is genuinely fun to watch without being super wink and nod or super insincere. It is a gonzo film, it's absurdist, and it's incredible. Like, I had so much fun with it. I saw it twice in the theaters. There's really not much else like it in cinema as a whole. Like, you can compare it to other shark movies or other sci-fi movies, but at its core, there's nothing quite like Meg 2 the Trench. And I wish I was being sarcastic saying that, but no, I really do love this movie, and I'm tired of pretending I don't. Number 24 is Ferrari, directed by my man, Michael Mann. Michael Mann is one of my favorite filmmakers, so obviously his first movie since 2015 I was going to be excited for, and while it has gotten a couple of mixed reactions from my friends, generally the Michael Mann fan base I feel like was pleased with this offering. This is a film about, as it would happen, Enzo Ferrari, his wife, and his baby mama, and him trying to make a car go fast. That is... That's about it. But in practice, it's much more dramatically investing than that sounds. Michael Mann has always been a filmmaker who kind of struggles with whether he wants to make his movies more dramatically satisfying or more aesthetically satisfying. And occasionally you'll get the rare synergy of both, which is why Heat is probably his best, like, all-purpose movie or whatever. Whereas, on the more dramatically satisfying end, you have movies like The Insider, and on the more aesthetically satisfying end, you have Miami Vice or Black Hat. I'm not saying one is better than the other, because both are valid ways to make movies, and also just, y'all seen Miami Vice? Y'all seen The Insider? Like, those are, like, two of the best movies ever. But anyhow, Ferrari is, like, surprisingly subdued for his first movie since fucking Black Hat, which is, like, one of the most forward-thinking movies aesthetically I can think of ever. Like, that movie is Abel Ferrara levels of innovative with its digital technology. In comparison, Ferrari is a lot more stripped back, a lot more dramatic, a lot more focused, and I think that works greatly to its benefit, because it is a lot about Michael Mann as an artist, because it's about Enzo Ferrari as an artist, about how stricken his conscience is, making these giant metal death machines, essentially. It's his greatest passion, but it's also his greatest curse. And it sounds like that would just make it The Wind Rises, but it has such a distinctly Michael Mann twist on it, where I've talked a lot before about Michael Mann's approach to cinematography, how he loves his lines, vertical, horizontal, diagonal lines, and how much lines show up as, like, a visual motif in his work. I could write a college thesis about how Michael Mann shoots movies, but here, the lines feel less like classic Michael Mann and more like a prison. Like, they're recontextualized to be, like, limiting the film in some way. Like, the film wants to go beyond the lines, and it can't. And when it does go beyond the lines, it's not pleasant. There are a couple of car crash scenes in the film that are, like, stunning and, like, made my theater gasp, like, audibly. And it's a film about the unknowing consequence of artistic action. And whatever the film is referring to, I can't make, like, a one-to-one comparison here like I might be able to with Oppenheimer, but I think it's a film that is very personal to Michael Mann in a lot of ways, and I'm glad he got to make it, because it's not only one of his easiest to invest in, but it's one of his most dramatically powerful and focused movies I feel like he's made in ages. Again, this sounds like I'm dissing Michael Mann. He's one of my favorite filmmakers, don't get it twisted, but this is a Michael Mann movie I'm more comfortable recommending to anyone rather than people into the same weird shit I am. Also, Penelope Cruz is in it and great. Number 23 is Padre Pio, directed by Abel Ferrara. Abel Ferrara is another pioneer, another master of digital technologies and, shooting movies. This is one of his most complicated movies yet, and that is saying a lot if you know who Abel Ferrara is. Like, homie made a Pasolini movie like a decade ago, and that's not even close to his most like artistically complex movie. I feel like Abel Ferrara is probably the single most undervalued director in discussions of legacy filmmakers, because I genuinely think he should be up there along with your Spielbergs and Scorsese's, but he isn't, because, you know, his biggest film is what, like Bad Lieutenant maybe, and that's not even close to his best movie, but I digress. Padre Pio is a bit of a hard one for me to recommend to other people because it is a film in 2023 starring Shia LaBeouf and Asia Argento, which is like, it's kind of a double whammy, and it's something I would completely understand you not wanting to watch the film if you were uncomfortable with. I'm still not sure if I'm comfortable with it, because in a lot of ways, the film does feel like Shia LaBeouf trying to play this character seeking redemption. Feels like a bit metatextual in terms of trying to give Shia LaBeouf redemption for, if you don't know, beating the shit out of FKA Twigs and abusing her. A whole bevy of gross shit that, you know, I don't know that he should be forgiven for. Like, I don't think he should be accepted back into Hollywood after that. But also, I don't feel like Abel Ferrara necessarily disagrees with that notion. Like, he works with him, but, I mean, I feel like it's plainly obvious that Shia LaBeouf's character here, while LaBeouf might think that the character is complicated, you can see from even a mild distance that he's the worst. He sucks. He is genuinely just a horrible person. And it is a film about horrible people coming to Jesus, but also it contrasts that with actual, like, Italian, like, revolutionaries trying to spread the word about communism in Italy right after World War I. Not only is it a film about Shia LaBeouf playing a preacher who is seeking redemption for being a shitty human being, but it also contrasts that with the story of genuine Italian revolutionaries trying to get something done in a rigged system. And the way the two intersect is so specifically up my alley as it pertains to religion and politics and the intersection of the two. It's so specifically for me, I don't really feel like I can super recommend it to other people because, you know, unless you're as interested in these specific things as I am, I don't know if you're going to get the same amount out of it. But I don't do this list for the many, I do it for the few. And if you are interested in things like the history of socialism and, you know, the intersection of politics and religion, and what honestly ends up being a pretty meaty bit of geopolitics, I feel like if any of that is up your alley, this is a movie worth at least looking into, especially because it pushes some boundaries, both with who's in it and what is happening in it, that, you know, it'll make you think. And, you know, formally this is not one of Ferrara's more experimental works. It's more classical. I know the movie he did before this was Zeros and Ones, and that, like, barely had a script. It was, like, super formally, like, adventurous. But Padre Pio is, like, genuinely his best movie in, like, a decade. I don't know, it's something I've been chewing on since I first saw it. I think it's a really bold and smart text about faith in often hopeless circumstances, and it's not going to be for everyone by any means, but it is a powerful sit. Number 22 is Saint Omer. This is a film from France directed by Alice Diop. It is essentially a courtroom drama about a woman accused of killing her 15-month-old daughter and the relatively unrelated onlooker that has this kind of odd connection with the whole thing. Like, she feels this sort of familiarity intrinsic with the woman who's being interrogated for this. And this is very much a film that follows along racial lines because the two main characters are black women trying to survive in this very harsh legal system that has been set up by the powers that be. But it's also a very confrontational film. Like, it is a film that might portray a connection between these two women, but that connection is not intrinsically positive. That relationship is more like the onlooker to a play than it is like an empathetic human connection. But there's a scene in the film that I don't really want to spoil, where a character looks directly into the camera. That shot is one of my favorites of the whole year. That shot stares directly into your fucking soul. And it's a very confrontational film, and it's a film that follows along a lot of political lines that I am not personally equipped to discuss, because A, I am American, B, I am white, and C, I just don't personally have a lot of the experiences that this movie is talking about as it pertains to motherhood and immigration and sort of culture shock. The most I can relate to this movie personally is loving
Diaspora
Problems. But honestly, I feel like that's a good comparison. That album is so angry, but it's so articulate that it's stuck with me more than a lot of other albums like it have. And Saint Omer is a lot like that. It's a kind of novelistic movie that really kind of digs deeper into the characters' psyches than I would have expected, and it has some of the best performances of the year. Also, I'm not quite at liberty to discuss this because I didn't do a ton of research into it, but I have heard that there are like actual bits of nonfiction testimony in the film, and it's a bit autobiographical for Alice Diop. That's pretty interesting and cool, and is worth exploring more if you are not me and have the time. We are halfway through the list. Everybody, pat yourself on the back, breathe, get yourself a drink. Number 21 is Eileen. This is not a film I can talk about a ton without giving a lot of away. So let's just say it's about Thomasin McKenzie and Anne Hathaway in an implicitly, maybe explicitly sapphic relationship that ends up resulting in a bit of a kerfuffle. I really wish I could say more about that, but I don't want to give away a lot of what it's about, although I will say it is a really dark movie once it goes to the places it does. But it's also a very depressingly empathetic movie, too. There is a scene where someone finally talks about something in the movie. That's all I'm going to say. It's a really powerful scene, but it's also just so good at being a homage to neo-noir stuff. It has this really solid, grounded period setting. Beyond everything, it is a fun and hot movie that I enjoyed. Speaking of fun and hot movies, number 20 is Sanctuary. This is straight up, like, maybe the best depiction of kink in cinema I've seen in ages. Like, I am genuinely kind of impressed that they got it sort of right. I don't know. It's a movie I can see a lot of people having negative opinions on because of just how many lines may or may not be crossed throughout the film. But I personally couldn't get enough of it. Watching it in theaters was, like, surreal but so much fun. Both Margaret Qualley and Christopher Abbott give amazing performances. It's a film about roleplay gone wrong, not clickbait, and it is just kind of claustrophobic, but also just, God, it's cinematic. It is, like, it hits. It has more to say about gender and art and sex than you would think, but at the same time it's just a really great erotic thriller that really goes there, and it's not afraid to go there, and as, like, a member of some of these communities, I greatly appreciated just how everything was handled. Number 19 is They Cloned Tyrone. Well, this was one of the bigger surprises of the year for me. I had heard good things when it came out, but like once I sat down and actually watched the film, I completely got why everybody was hyping it up. I might even go further than a lot of people, and I feel like this is like one of the best screenplays written in ages. Just so good. It's so good. It is so creative and darkly funny and biting, and it has everything I want in satire, but also has this level of humanity I feel like most great satires lack. It grounds itself with Fontaine, John Boyega's character, and gives itself more of an emotional core than I was expecting it to, but also then it is able to twist your arm in a lot of ways and get you to think about like the more genuine, real sociopolitical implications of what the film is getting at as it pertains to gentrification and the policing of black neighborhoods and the historical experimentation on black neighborhoods and how segregation is still kind of totally a thing. And it's getting into this kind of horrifying thought underneath it all that, yeah, the government could replace entire black neighborhoods and white neighborhoods wouldn't be able to tell the difference. It's not a nihilistic film per se, and I feel like the film is far too funny to be as much of a downer as I might make it out to be. But afterwards, I did genuinely have to sit down and think for a while about outreach or lack thereof and get involved with your own community before it's too late, essentially. I think this is a brilliant satire. It would pair really well with Sorry to Bother You. That's like the closest contemporary I can think of for it. And it is just as bonkers, but in different ways. And with better character writing too. Like Sorry to Bother You it's kind of satire first, character piece second. They Cloned Tyrone has, like, honest to God, great characters. It is a bit too dimly lit for its own good, but overall the blend of genres are so good, and John Boyega is, like, a star. Give him all the roles. It is one of my favorites of the year, and I would recommend it to just about anyone. Number 18 is one of the more obscure films on my list. It is a French-Canadian film directed by Pascal Plante by the name of Red Rooms. Just right off the bat, there are Rina Sawayama and black dresses needle drops, and if that isn't queer coding the main character, I don't know what is, but also, like, holy shit. black dresses needle drop in a movie, I flipped out. Anyhow, this is essentially about a lady becoming infatuated with this serial killer as he is on trial for, murdering little girls. And even if we're told explicitly that, like, yeah, no, he's super guilty, like, she thinks he's innocent, and she meets another lady who thinks he's innocent, and they sort of bond over that. So it's kind of a relationship drama, but also, as more and more is revealed about the characters and about this serial killer, things start getting weird, and relationships start getting complicated, and there's so much here. I don't want to spoil stuff, because a lot of the motivations of characters, like, aren't clear until, like, towards the very end, and the payoffs, and there are scenes in this movie that, like, they're kind of like Demons, or, like, Breaking Bad, where it's, like, not even, like, particularly, like, graphic. It's just, like, the fact that that happened in the context of the universe is so insane that, like, I can't believe they're insane for trying that and, like, pulling it off. It becomes less of a thriller or a courtroom drama, more of a character study about this lady, Kellyanne, who is dubiously intentioned, would be polite, but we also are inclined to sympathize with her because she's the main character of the movie, and we see her underlying loneliness. We see her quiet demeanor. We see, like, oh, what is going through her head when she's doing this? Like, why does she care when she is not, like, remotely connected to it, right? And the real answers it gives are so much more accurate to how I feel a lot of people act in the internet age about stuff like serial killers. It's not always the most fun movie to watch because of what it's getting at, as it pertains to online video content and disturbing video and shock sites. I mean, the title should give it away that it's greatly about examining these videos that are used as evidence in this murder trial. God, I really just don't want to spoil it. But, like, it's so, like, it's perfect. Like, it's one of the best movies about existing on the internet in the modern age, being an unwilling/willing participant in that sort of not safe for life space. As a veteran of the scene, as someone who has their own trauma related to disturbing videos, it hit, In many regards, this is the best movie about getting sent the Funky Town video since Pulse. That's, like, over 2 decades old. It is one of the best movies ever, too, though. Like, go watch Pulse, but a phenomenal movie. One of the most underrated of the year. Number 17 is May December. This is a fascinating film about a very hard topic to cover, that being grooming and pedophilia that didn't end with a pedophile, like, away from the person they groomed, but married with kids to them. It's not like a light movie, but it's also very melodramatic, and it is funny, but at the same time, it's a film that is using that melodrama of Natalie Portman's character, who is an actor trying to study the pedophile in question, played by Julianne Moore. She's trying to study Moore's character, Gracie, and her relationship with the victim in question, Joe, who doesn't want to be seen as a victim. And this is where, like, the film starts getting into, like, some really interesting boundary-pushing ideas that, I don't know that I'm really the person to discuss, but I feel like the way everything was handled was very sensitive and done with tact. And the fact that Joe, who is played by Charles Melton, gives such an incredible performance that is absolutely one of my favorites of the year, it certainly helps matters. But I don't know, it's a film about, like, this trio of characters who are all kind of feeding off each other in negative ways and don't quite realize the full impact of what they have all done. And while it does definitely play up a lot of that for comedy, it also uses it to gnaw at a sort of, like, underlying emptiness in all of the characters, a sort of unfulfillment that each of them are experiencing. Roy Deschanel made a great video on it, which I will link in the description if I remember. There's a lot more here than I would have expected, and I went in completely blind. I was just, excited to see a new Todd Haynes movie. And while it isn't as good as Carol, few things are. I will say this film has fallen a few spots after hearing apparently the film is actually based on a true story. I have not looked into that enough to really comment on it, but I feel like the film handled it pretty well. But then again, so far removed from the situation, I don't know. So there's May December for you. On the topic of pedophilia, number 16 is Priscilla. I feel like the fact that Elvis got nominated out the wazoo at the Oscars last year, and this year Priscilla got nothing, really should tell you how good Priscilla is at indicting Elvis. because, well, Baz Luhrmann's movie, I'm not like a hater of it per se. Like, Austin Butler is good, and Baz Luhrmann is a good director, as it would happen. It's just so uncritical of Elvis that, like, I can really only read it as, like, hero worship, and the fact that it completely glosses over how old Priscilla really was when they first met is pretty actively troubling. Here, you know, Sofia Coppola is directing, and she has always made sure to treat these things with the care they deserve, and you know, Priscilla Presley actually endorses, you know, this movie. It's based on her memoir, and it's about how Elvis from the start was a grown man actively pursuing a baby. The film, in so many of its moments, makes sure to accentuate the fact that Priscilla is still just a small child in so many ways. Like, she is tiny, and props to Kaylee Spaney for one of the best performances of the year. The fact that she got snubbed was infuriating to me because she's able to really convincingly portray Priscilla at so many different points in her life, whether she's 14 or whether she's in her 40s. And I would go a step farther too and say that Jacob Elordi as Elvis is a better Elvis than Austin Butler was. He's just intrinsically creepier and is far more aware of what Elvis was really like than I feel like Austin Butler was, who could do the accent, but he didn't bring the discomfort that I feel like a man of power like Elvis sort of just exudes, especially in relationships and power dynamics as fucked up as the one in Priscilla, where he's taking advantage of not only a 14-year-old, but a fan. It's a movie that is going to hurt a lot of people because of their memory of Elvis. It's going to come off as like an Elvis smear campaign unless you're a sane person and have come to terms with the fact that Elvis, you know, was a pedophile. It's a movie that says the quiet part super loud. It made me super nauseous. It's not a fun movie to watch at all, but it is like a piece that I feel like is worth not only experiencing, but like I would say it's almost a must see, just because it is a reckoning we as the American people probably need to have with Elvis as a figure, and the fact that this instigated so much of that for so many people is great, even if there are still a weird amount of people who are in denial about it. Excellent cinematography, obviously. I love Sofia Coppola, and this is like her best movie in quite literally a decade, and yeah, I really feel like this will go down as one of the essential films of this year.
Number 15
is Anatomy of a Fall, directed by Justine Triet. I was really super happy to see how well this movie did in the US because it really is a phenomenal film, and it's the sort of film I feel could be very much overlooked by American audiences any other year. But I feel like between Justine Triet's kind of methodical, straight-laced, yet super layered and dense style of direction and editing, and Sandra Hüller's incredible lead performance as a wife who is not on the greatest terms with her dead husband, but is also trying to defend herself as innocent against allegations of that she would have murdered him. Did he fall? Did he jump on purpose? Or did she push him? And so the film is tense from that perspective, but it's also a film that very masterfully questions the audience on who they are trusting and why they are trusting the people they are in the situation. Like, why are you rooting for this woman when she very well might be a murderer? Who knows? And I won't give away what happened, but I will say this movie is far more fucked up and borderline nihilistic than I would have expected. Like, I feel like it does enough to not come off as a complete bummer, but there's just so many more layers of complexity to the relationship between even just two people in this movie than I would have expected. And what helps is their son, Daniel, played by Milo Machado Graner, honestly might give the single best child performance I've ever seen. I'm just gonna say the Snoop scene is one of the best performed scenes I've seen, like, possibly ever. And the fact that it grounds itself in Daniel, in the shoes of this kid, and the fact that he's also kind of the voice of reason in a lot of ways is kind of fascinating and kind of damning of the parents in this situation, that they're getting upstaged by their own kid. Yeah, shout out Daniel. But it's a very twisty movie, and even if it doesn't bring a ton of new innovations to the courtroom drama as a whole, I feel like the specific case is more than complicated enough to make the film feel uniquely itself. Incredibly well acted movie that's stuck with me throughout the year and has grown on me the more I think about it. And yeah, I'm glad to see it doing as well as it is. Number 14 is Evil Dead Rise. I know, this is my list, and Evil Dead Rise is probably my favorite Evil Dead movie. Not that I feel like you can really say, oh, X Evil Dead movie is the best execution of the formula, because there isn't really one beyond book makes people go ooga booga. But I have a love-hate relationship with this series, and this is not only the most uniquely tailored to my own interests as a horror fan, but the way it actually, actualized a lot of things I've wanted from horror movies, including the Evil Dead series that I hadn't seen accentuated to its fullest before this. I had so much fun watching this in the theater. My dad fucking hated it, which was hilarious to me because it's so good to watch a movie and know that you can still be shocked by a movie. You can still squirm and jump and also laugh and cry, and the film is a very weirdly personable movie. It has characters I see a lot of myself and a lot of people I know in. The way it maps out its setting is like a genius update of the haunted house with this sort of apartment complex they're in. It's kinetic, it's extremely gory, it is deranged, and it is just a wild ride that is made for people who want to sit back and enjoy that wild ride. It is a movie for horror movie fans like myself who are not trying to dead meat it, who are not trying to detach from it in some way, and instead just sit back and enjoy where the film is taking you. You are not trying to figure out who done it. You're not trying to make a one-liner every time somebody dies. Instead, you are just strapped to your fucking seat as they whip you around this bonkers narrative that is just, it's fun. I'm so glad I had fun watching a movie this year. It's just like a metal as fuck horror movie that reminds me of Peter Jackson's horror movies, which are his best movies, by the way. I loved the time I spent with this movie, and it's one I look forward to coming back to because it really is just such a specifically up my alley movie. I never thought I'd see the day when a random guy named Lee Cronin can outdo fucking Sam Raimi for me, but there we go. Number 13 is Asteroid City. This is the newest film from Wes Anderson. You no doubt have an opinion on him. So do I. Wes Anderson was one of the first directors I really got into, and I still hold quite a bit of his work in high regard, but recently I've not been as infatuated with his movies as others have. I feel like he kind of surrendered himself to his own aesthetic, and his films got a little cold. They got a little impersonal. Part of what I love about my favorite movie of his, The Royal Tenenbaums, is how raw it is and how weirdly personal it is, and how the dollhouse aesthetic is kind of just aesthetic dressing for more going on underneath the characters in The Royal Tenenbaums than the aesthetic was led on. After Fantastic Mr. Fox is where Wes started to lose me. And I know that's where a lot of people got on the Wes Anderson train with Moonrise Kingdom, Grand Budapest Hotel, etc. I don't love either of those movies. I feel like he got too scattershot, too idiosyncratic, and you kind of lost the emotional core that made Royal Tenenbaums and made Life Aquatic the movies they are to me. Even Fantastic Mr. Fox, which is a very, very Wes Anderson TM movie, that movie has more of an emotional core than something like The Grand Budapest Hotel did, or Isle of Dogs did. And while I didn't love The French Dispatch, I did feel like it was a step in the right direction because of just Wes Anderson getting back to having more interesting ideas and more character-focused stories, whereas things like Grand Budapest and Isle of Dogs were throwing people at you all the time. French Dispatch, while it has a giant cast of characters, it's very much about that cast of characters, and I feel like it was a bit more personable than his previous works at that point. And then Asteroid City came along, and it's my favorite Wes Anderson movie since Fantastic Mr. Fox. This is a wonderful movie that has that large cast of characters, that has a lot of explicitly dolled up aesthetic moments, that has that classic idiosyncratic Wes Anderson style, but it's also a film where Wes Anderson kind of takes you and goes, if this is all you see in my movies, you're watching my movies wrong, because the reality is Asteroid City is greatly about the people. It's about the relationships between the characters that are so quietly loaded and so telling in a lot of ways, and it's a film about creation and also daddy issues, and was far more moving and reflexive and genuinely intelligent than I would have expected. It is a movie in direct conversation with the people who made the fucking AI Wes Anderson shits, where he's yeah, you can make things that kind of vaguely look like my stuff, but you can't make my movies, because the things that make my movies are not all the aesthetic signifiers so much as the characters. And that's not a notion I would have agreed with if the film didn't bring the heat when it came to character writing and performances. It's genuinely just a very sweet and sensible movie that has a lot to say about art and artifice and gets at something more human than I feel like any Wes Anderson film has done since Life Aquatic. It's a film that's grown on me a lot with time as well, and really the only problem I have with it is that it isn't more beloved by people. Like, I really don't get why it's not held at the same level as something like The Grand Budapest Hotel, because I think this is one of his best movies. Number 12 is The Iron Claw. This is not a movie I was expecting a ton from, but to say I was pleasantly surprised would be an understatement. It's really just a spectacularly well-acted and sensitive motion picture about the Von Erich family, who were / are very, very historically significant professional wrestlers. And, you know, as a modest WWE fan, part of the fun of this movie is just getting to watch how accurately they kind of throw you back to the early 80s wrestling scene. And there's a scene where Ric Flair makes an appearance. And that's got to be one of my favorite scenes of the year. But also it's a film about these really, really intense familial power dynamics between father and son and husband and wife and brother. And it goes into some really interesting places that I would not have expected. Like, it is very much a familial melodrama, and it earns it. The director, Sean Durkin, does a bang-up job at just getting you into the period and the psyches of the characters and the pressure they're all feeling. The film is titled after the Iron Claw, which is a wrestling move the Von Erichs were like famous for, and you can kind of feel that pressure that is the Iron Claw move being applied to each character in different ways. And it's all stemming from the center, which is the father. The film is pretty emotionally devastating. It deals a lot with death, and there's a scene near the end that this is the sort of movie that'll make almost anyone cry, but it's also a movie that, you know, look you in the eye and go, hey, it's okay to cry. It's okay to be a man and cry. These are not contradictory things. It is a film about reorienting yourself with healthier notions of masculinity, and, you know, it's a really moving movie. I think all the performances are great. I mean, the wrestling scenes are phenomenal, and really, I just appreciate a film that is this explicitly for the guys, that is able to tackle a lot of this stuff in a genuinely healthy way. This is a film that is going to have a positive impact on the world because of what it's coming to terms with. Number 11 is Monster. This is the new Hirokazu Koreeda film. For most of the year, I genuinely wrote this off as a 2024 release, but one day I got on the AMC app and it was like just showing, so I'm obviously not going to turn that down. Yeah, as would happen, it is one of the absolute best movies I saw this year. It is a thriller in a lot of ways because it is playing with a lot of what is X person's motivation, what does X person know that Y doesn't. There's just a lot of information that the film takes its time revealing as it goes from person to person. It is a film about perspective, kind of about how these specific characters are all intersecting with each other and how they all affect each other in one way or another, before it strips back and just gives you the answers with no bullshit about the two main characters. And this is a movie that is far, far more beautiful and personally relevant than I would have expected. Along with the next movie on the list, it is something that tackles the explicit experience of the parent of a queer kid, where there is this sort of familial want for this person to grow up and be a dad and a husband to a wife and have kids and shit. And, you know, if you don't want a wife, if you're coming to terms with your sexuality like that, chances are your parents telling you all that is going to make you feel like shit. It's such a quiet, borderline peaceful movie, and so many spots. It genuinely feels meditative on a lot of these things. And then it also turns around and has moments of pure emotional turbulence. I'm still not 100% sure how to take the ending, but I was a mess watching this movie. It's beautiful, it's incredibly well acted, has great child acting, just absolutely one of my favorites of the year, and well worth seeking out. We have reached the top 10. These are my 10 favorite motion pictures of the year 2023, starting with Joyland. This is an Iranian film about how weird we are about our, like, children having kids. This guy buckling under the pressure to give his family a baby boy specifically, and ends up having a sort of fling with a trans woman. He ends up kind of misunderstanding things, and he's kind of a shithead. And okay, it's kind of a film about how much internalized guilt and shame queer people have about not being able to procure the specific genealogy that, like, I guess older people in the family care about, even though bloodlines don't matter. It's always about the namesake of your family. Just a really raw and beautiful film about some really horrible things societally that we're kind of pressured to do. There are like so many of my favorite scenes of the year in this movie. It has like actual good trans representation, which I don't want to get into too deeply, but I feel like it's very well done. It's really just a remarkably well composed picture about something that like has hit me so much specifically as someone who was supposed to be the quote unquote last boy of the family and just didn't. Yeah, it struck a nerve with me. Beautifully shot, super well acted, and it's not the cheeriest film. It's pretty heavy. But I would say for a specific type of person, such as myself, it's going to resonate super deep. Number 9 is Killers of the Flower Moon. This is the newest Scorsese film, and having seen all of his movies now, this is one of his better movies, which is saying a lot because he's Martin fucking Scorsese, but even so, I feel like the older he gets, the wiser, and the more contemplative his movies have become, but in surprisingly morbid ways. Y'all seen Silence? That is like the Green Inferno for Catholics. And here he's grappling with the very real genocide of indigenous peoples here in the 1920s in Oklahoma. And let's just say, as a Kansan, seeing this movie, it arose a lot of complicated feelings in me that I don't know that I'll really be able to unpack here in any sort of depth because of the nature of, what this film is getting at. This is a film as much influenced by Westerns as it is just a film about the West. The story of colonialism and genocide and how that happens so often and how hard it is to fight and just how easy to comply with the genocide it is if you are not one of the people under active attack. And the way it kind of skewers Leonardo DiCaprio's character, I think, is really interesting because of how much it does empathize with him, with how much it does see where he's coming from and how conflicted he is about so much of this. But it never equivocates. It never makes excuses for him. And it side-eyes him in so many interesting ways, especially as it pertains to how he treats his wife Molly, here played by Lily Gladstone, who I loved in Certain Women and was super excited to see was cast in this movie. And I'm rooting for her for Best Actress because, she's incredible. She's phenomenal. Also, I just want they to win Best Actress, okay? But yeah, this is a sprawling epic. It has genuinely sweltering highs. It has such soul-destroying empty lows. It has incredible performances across the board. There's a part where Brendan Fraser shows up as the lawyer, and I try not to clap in the theater because I was so excited. And the ending is genuinely one of the best things Martin Scorsese has ever done. Not just because of its contents, but because of who exactly is cameoing in that scene. There's 2 people, and I don't want to spoil who they are, but let's just say the 2 together, everything clicked. Like, Martin Scorsese, his identity as a director, and what this movie is in his greater legacy, I think is well cemented in that ending. I think it's a brilliant film, and while I fully expect Oppenheimer to win Best Picture, this is honestly just as worthy. Number 8 is The Holdovers. This movie is directed by alleged sex offender Alexander Payne, so fuck that, but also I don't know. Point is, this is still one of my favorite movies of the year. I love Paul Giamatti so much. He's genuinely one of my favorite actors, and so I was, chomping at the bit to see him in this, and he's phenomenal. I'm super glad he got nominated for an Oscar because he's great, not just comedically, not just dramatically, but just as a human being here. He plays this very clear archetype, but he plays him with such underlying humanity and respect that the film is genuinely compassionate and bittersweet and far more complicated than I think I would have expected. In many ways, it is like one of those feel-good, cozy movies of yore, but with how everything unfolds, with how it ends, it's not really a feel-good movie. It is a film about gaining new perspective, about getting the bigger picture, the main kid character, Angus, coming of age, and starting to understand the world around him better. And I think not only is it just beautifully tender and well-written and snappy, like there's such great exchanges of dialogue in this movie, but it's also just so aesthetically pleasing and warm and kind of delightful. Like, it is such a winter movie, it's such a Christmas movie, yet it approaches it all with a very faintly melancholic tone. And, that's my shit. Holy shit, my voice is about to go. Number 7 is Ennie's Main, directed by Mark Jenkin. This is a film from Cornwall, and not one of the easier movies to recommend on this entire list, but absolutely one of the most unique movies I saw all year. one of the most formally challenging and distinct, and it's definitive. Like, it has this very specific vision that it executed with gusto. It's not something I would have expected to really connect with me the way it did, but I think it's a fascinating movie. It's a movie about how you look into a space for long enough, you'll start seeing it stare back at you. And it does this through this middle-aged woman who is like a volunteer on this otherwise uninhabited island. She essentially is thrust into a nightmare about the natural world and her surroundings and her greater role in the world. And it's a very, very cerebral, disturbing, like stark movie that is also something that is not for everyone. It's something that you will either sit paralyzed in fear at, or you will laugh it off, or think it's boring. If you do either of the latter things, then just leave. This is not your channel. It's really just such a singular experience in film. Like, I can't think of another movie I've ever seen quite like it. And the way it talks about both Cornish history and the greater history of, the world that can be seen echoing throughout Cornwall. It's a really smart movie that is going to go down as, well, probably not a cult classic, something that, the cool kids will recommend you as a particularly singular horror experience. Number 6 is Beau is Afraid. This is the newest film from Ari Aster, who I like. I love Hereditary. Midsummer is pretty good. And then Beau is Afraid is like my favorite film of his right now. And I'll be honest, the first time I watched Beau is Afraid, I totally didn't get it. I thought there was a lot of neat ideas, but I just didn't quite want to engage with it on a deeper level. And after watching it, I read enough reviews, and I was convinced I had gotten enough wrong that I should go back and give it another shot. So the next day, I watched it again, and what can I say? It clicked. It clicked so hard. This movie is genius. Genius. And for very rudimentary reasons, too, when you think about it. Like, beyond it being really just robust, clever visual comedy. All the performances are great and like very distinctly memorable in their own way. Shout out Nathan Lane for like one of the most overlooked performances of the year here, because I genuinely think he's great here. More than all of that, it is one of the smartest movies about a type of guy I think I've ever seen. I've never seen a film be about its own haters the way Beau is Afraid is. The sort of people who are inclined to dislike this movie are the exact sort of people Ari Aster is critiquing with the character of Beau and is making a comedy out of, because Beau is a fucking loser. There's so much I would love to get into with this movie as it pertains to, how it tackles Judaism and masculinity and like mommy issues and like possible psychosexual readings. I don't know, but I don't want to get into all that here, mostly because my voice is going, but yeah, suffice it to say, Beau is Afraid is another very singular experience. And it isn't going to be for everyone. It is a 3-hour comedy that is kind of meant to be laughing at the main character more than with. But I feel like it goes to such depths that no other movie like it really has, even amongst the movies even vaguely like it, which, very few. There's so little like it, even remotely, as to what it does, and it does it so specifically and so well that, like, I don't know, I feel like Ari Aster just, like, mastered this niche subgenre that, like, nobody has ever, like, heard of until now, and he just created, like, its magnum opus. It's like if mecha anime didn't exist until Neon Genesis Evangelion, Like, what are you gonna do now? Also, I just got to shout out Harry Wasserman, which is one of the craziest things I think someone has put on IMAX screens probably ever. Number 5 is How to Blow Up a Pipeline. This is directed by Daniel Goldhaber, who directed Cam, which is a movie I saw this past year as well, and I fucking love. Honestly, probably more than this movie, but How to Blow Up a Pipeline is still, like, it's so almost self-evidently perfect that, like, I genuinely don't know what I can say about it. It's one of those litmus test movies where, like, I can see how well we'll get along by if you think the characters are doing a moral right or not. Personally, I think absolutely what they're doing is an objective moral good, and they should do it, and people should do it more. If you disagree with that, just get the boot out of your throat, dude. In any case, this is just like a perfect movie. It's like just this super tight-knit screenplay that, like, interconnects so many of the characters' plot lines together, like an episode of Community or something. And yet it's taken seriously with this really, like, heartfelt sense of communal action that's being taken here. And it's gorgeous. It's super, super unbelievably tense. It's a movie so up my alley, I kind of can't believe it exists. Number 4 is How to Have Sex, directed by Molly Manning Walker. Yes, I have 2 tutorials in my top 5. Get over it. This is a movie about the British club circuit, and in particular, a trio of teenage girls who go vacation to this clubbing circuit, with the express intent of getting, drunk and laid and what have you. So fairly typical coming-of-age story setup, right? Kind of, not really. In reality, it is a very, 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 very not fun movie to watch. It's just super, super, well acted, but also, a movie that keeps so much bottled in that it hurts to watch the characters interact with each other for a lot of it. And it's just such a succinct capturing of relationship dynamics I've seen in real life. I've seen play out, not quite like this, because I would have said something, but I feel like there's something this movie is getting at that is far more accurate to the teenage experience of even American teenagers than most movies about teens in the mainstream these days. This is one of those movies that tackles things that, people don't like to think about happening, but very much do happen. And again, that means it's not going to be for everybody, but I think this movie is nothing short of stellar beyond being super well acted and shot. It's very tense and claustrophobic and feels like it's made by and for people with social anxiety, but also normal people who go out to parties with their friends in the first place. This is a movie that I see a lot of my own experiences in as a 20-year-old who has been through a lot of what this movie is talking about. Not all of it, obviously, but a lot of it. It's more accurate capturing of life, quote unquote, on the edge as a teenager than any other movie I think I've seen in recent memory, since Larry Clark movies at least. And that's a whole can of worms I don't want to open up, but even so, the way the film tackles its main relationship or lack thereof it's rough, but it's real. And I also think that the main trio of women are maybe the single best capturing of the trio friend group dynamic I've ever seen. There's you, and then there's the one that you can joke around with, but then also have serious conversations with, and then there's the one you can only joke around with and isn't quite on your wavelength and might end up making things worse for you. But then it's also tackling 2 of the 3 friends are going to college and you aren't. Stuff like that. And it hits. I don't know, it's not an easy watch, but it is a film that I've not really stopped thinking about since I first saw it. I love it. Number 3 is Saw X. This is not a joke. This is genuinely taking bronze this year. I like the Saw movies. I'm friends with a lot of people who love the Saw movies, so I'm caught up with a lot of the memes and whatnot, but there's only a couple movies in the franchise I genuinely would say I love, those being 2 and 6 and maybe Spiral. Spiral's underrated, but then you can also add Saw X to that list because this is, honest to God, the best Saw movie. They figured it out. They figured out what they wanted to do with John Kramer as a character. Holy shit, guys. It all makes sense now. This goes so much farther into who John Kramer is and what John Kramer means for the series as a whole in both metaphorical and literal terms that, not only is Tobin Bell, genuinely, just wonderful and gives one of my favorite performances of the year, but, I genuinely feel I understand John Kramer as a character now far more than any of the other movies, where they kind of kept John Kramer inconsistent by default, where, yeah, none of his motivations quite made sense. Getting into the nitty-gritty of the sadomasochist aspects of it and the self-harm aspects of it, and if you're a Saw fan, you've probably already seen it, so spoilers if you haven't, but the fact that they bring Amanda back and detail even further her relationship to John Kramer and how that is such an unfair power dynamic and how detailed their performances both are, beyond being a great Saw movie, because there are just great traps. It is really, really violent in the classic Saw tradition. Beyond that, it is the one that most understands what the series is about, both in the context of BDSM and self-harm and the post-9/11 political context it takes on, and even geopolitical stuff, because this one's set in Mexico City. Obviously, healthcare and grifters, and so many things are tackled in Saw X with a weirdly politically astute edge to them, and I can't help but respect that. Is the villain not just Michaela Peterson? Anyhow, regardless, I am still kind of in awe of Saw X. I have been wanting to write more in depth about it for a while, but that also requires me rewatching all of the Saw movies, and that is an undertaking. So we'll see. But anyhow, number 2, taking silver this year, and boy was it super, super close, was Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning. There used to be a part 1. They dropped it apparently. I don't know if the next one is going to just be called something different or if this is the last one. It better not be the last one, because I would genuinely be so sad if it was, because this is my favorite part 1 of the year and I do adore it and I think it's like good as its own thing, but come on. I need more Mission Impossible, please. I finally got caught up on the series this year, and I gotta say, they were worth the hype. Ghost Protocol is like my own personal like wet dream of an action movie, and I think Christopher McQuarrie has taken the series in for the most part refreshing direction. I know there's quite a few people, at least in my circles, who preferred the sort of movie-to-movie director shift, and I can definitely see that, but as the series gets less and less serialized and more singular storyline driven, I feel like this is not a bad way to do it, and it helps that McQuarrie is genuinely like a great director at this point. He just knows what to do. He's got such rock-solid fundamentals, and it's one of those movies where you sit down and you just witness greatness for 2.5 hours. It's so casually great at editing and shot composition and pacing and lighting, and God, the location game is on point. The action is like weirdly brutal, but also just the action in Dead Reckoning is phenomenal. Like, the Rome sequence is an all-timer. Dude, the stairs, the baby carriage, the subway. This movie, as well as its series, excels at what I would like to call tension cringe, which is just moments you, clench your butthole at. Like, are they going to make that? The way it plays with your expectations, it is so creative and dynamic and like wordlessly emotional and borderline operatic at times. I love how the entire third act is a fucking train sequence, because trains are, if you didn't know, the secret to good action, but also like the fact that it blows up and changes course and it folds back in on itself in such creative ways. The bottom drops out, and like just so many moments here are just action movie heaven. And it's so engaging. Beyond being a great action movie, it's also a great Mission Impossible movie. It plays on established series tropes so well without winking at the audience or any sort of cynicism. It is sincerely Mission Impossible from the get-go. It's immaculately paced. It has this Rube Goldberg marble maze-ass script. Tom Cruise, he's literally Superman. Like, I know he's a Scientologist, which isn't great, but God, he's like our last real action star. This movie reminds me of Thank You for the Venom by My Chemical Romance. It's just like a fucking powerhouse of a movie. I want to write more in depth on this movie, because it really just like, it is phenomenal. I haven't even talked about like the asexual undercurrents or how great a lot of the cast is here, whether you're talking about Ving Rhames or Vanessa Kirby or fucking Haley Atwell in a new role that I am all for. I haven't talked about how the film feels like a friend group. I haven't talked about the fatalist undertones. I haven't talked about the fact that the MacGuffin is like frauding dicks. It's a movie about like being ride or die for your friends. And God, I love my friends. I love Mission Impossible. Kind of want to go and watch Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning right now. But I only have one movie left, right? Which leads me to our gold medal winner, my favorite movie of the year. It's not a hot take. I can finally agree that Oppenheimer is the best movie of 2023. I've already written extensively about Oppenheimer. I saw it 3 times in theaters in the span of like 4 days, and my love for it cannot really be overstated. Not only is it the best work of Christopher Nolan, it feels like his first big boy movie, like he graduated to movies on a different plane than the ones he was making, because I have a bit of a weird relationship with Nolan. Like, I loved him when I was like 14, but coming back to a lot of his movies, I don't like a lot of them, especially the Dark Knight trilogy, don't get me started. And then Oppenheimer comes out, and like, God, Oppenheimer is about the Dark Knight trilogy. The bomb is the Dark Knight trilogy. I said that before Matt Pat did. You can look it up. Anyhow, Oppenheimer is a movie about how much Christopher Nolan regrets making the Dark Knight trilogy. It's also, there's so much going on. It's one of the more left-wing movies I've ever seen have this big a cast and budget and everything. Nolan is in conversation with so much actual like leftist thought in this movie that I was just shocked, but also just impressed. If nothing else, how much he's grown as a filmmaker. Like, the fact that Nolan's last movie was something as cumbrained as Tenet, and then he turned around and made Oppenheimer, which is still at times cumbrained, I won't sugarcoat that, but like in conversation with so much more, in conversation with the legacy of Oppenheimer and World War II, and in conversation with the concepts of Marx and Hegel and, Hegelian dialectics. It's in conversation with that and actual science and with art and with so many things, and it all weaves its tapestry so masterfully. The editing by Jennifer Lamb is like this. It's the best editing I saw all year, bar none. It floored me. The edit in this movie is astounding. Like, I'm surprised this movie's only 3 hours long, and it doesn't feel 3 hours long. The film is, I said before, if the film is a 10, the edit is an 11. Again, I wrote extensively about this movie, what it means to me, so I will link that below. But I just need to tell you that, yeah, Oppenheimer is my favorite movie of 2023. It is the one I can most easily recommend anyone seeing. It is not like a happy movie, but it's a movie that is so unbelievably like powerful and personal and just riveting from beginning to end. It runs the gamut of emotions. It has a ton of the best performances of the year. It looks beautiful. It has so many moments that I just feel like will be forever ingratiated in the public consciousness, and I can't sing this movie's praises highly enough. And that'll just about do it for this video. That is, unless you noticed something. I said between Saint Omer, number 22, and Eileen, number 21, that we were halfway, but that would mean we were halfway through 44 movies and not 43. This is because number 0 is the Gmod stream. I don't know what this is. I don't know what to do with it. It was just kind of something I learned about through Hazel, who is one of the best YouTube people, by the way. It just kind of fell into my lap, and I watched it, and it is one of the best pieces of digital horror media I can think of. And it's free to watch on YouTube right now. Go show Marcy's some love, because it's genuinely the best thing I saw this year. And, am I going to call it my favorite movie of the year over Oppenheimer? No, because this is going to appeal to a very, 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 very small niche of people. But if you know me at all, watching this through and, why it connected with me and I love it so much, it should be clear. It's not going to be for everyone, again, which is why it is at number 0. Oppenheimer is still like my technical official number 1 favorite movie of the year, but the Gmod stream is here at number 0 because if you are one of the few people, as in my lane as I am, it's my lane, damn it. Yeah, no, you're gonna want to check this out. It is something I have not stopped thinking about since I first saw it. I don't really know how deep the rabbit hole actually goes, but I love it. I love the fact that it exists. I love how much creativity and passion was put into it. I love how accurate it feels to my own experience of playing games online, and I love just the slow ambiguity and the dread of it all. It's great, and you can go watch it for free on YouTube right now. So with that, before my voice becomes any more shot to shit, this has been my favorite movies of 2023. I am so sorry for this taking as long as it did. I wanted to get this out in January. A variety of things happened. Depression, funerals, and then also people in the hospital. And then I wanted to wait for the Oscar nominations to come out. And then I wanted to wait for my new mic to get here. Boo. I just had a ton of stuff that I needed to work on. So yeah, this ended up coming out in February. And I apologize. But also, I don't apologize for shit. Everybody's got stuff going on. More broadly, with the status of the channel, I don't know what I want the future to be for this channel, because on the one hand, I do definitely want to keep making videos in some capacity, but on the other hand, I'm really not sure what about. I'd like for this channel to be a little more focused on something than just, my projects as a whole, because there's so much I work on that I don't feel like I want some more coherency than I'm really putting out there. So if this ends up becoming a music channel in 2 months, don't be super surprised, because I'm as much of a music person as I am a movie person. Go check out my best of 2023 albums list and my best songs of 2023 list, which I put up on Rate Your Music, because I put a lot of effort into those. And for the real ones, I thank you for sticking around for this long and for listening to me ramble ad nauseum. This has taken me literally almost 4 hours to record, and I need to rest. So thank you for sticking around, and if I introduced you to at least one movie today that you hadn't heard of before, or that, you've decided to watch because of me and becomes like a new favorite, my work here is done. That's literally all I want. So thank you all so much, and I will see you when I see you.